It's not left. It's not right. It's the state versus you. Alex Ansary, Outside the Box.
They're drumming it into us through the war machine that it's not okay to ask questions anymore, and you just do, and they're kind of recreating what the word patriot means. A lot of young people today are, they're hooking them so much into this matrix reality of television and cell phones and video games that it's like, and every video game is about death now.
If you ask most people in New York how many buildings fell that day, 2 planes crashed into 2 buildings, so how many buildings fell? What would the public say?
Oh, they'd say 2.
2, right, but how many really fell that day?
3.
3, right. World Trade Center Building 7 fell that day. It was 2 blocks away from the Twin Towers. It fell at 8 hours later. It was never hit by anything. It collapsed in a smooth wave demolition straight down.
Why it happened, we have to talk about prior knowledge, the insider trading, the drug trafficking. There's a lot of information, and you can hit it from all these different angles that talk about the centralized control, where we're headed, why we're headed there.
Today we live in a paranoid society. Everybody's out for only themselves and their family, if that. And they're constantly watching their neighbor. All you have to do is turn on Fox News at 10. September 11th, 2001, we were attacked by jihadist Afghan terrorists, Al-Qaeda. The reason they did this was because they hated our freedom, I heard somewhere. Now we're going to have a war on them, or we did have a war on them that lasted, a few seconds, a few weeks. Now we're moving to other parts of the world, other parts of the country even, all to spread democracy and protect us from terrorists. Now, do you see anything wrong with that official line?
Pretty much everything, but yeah.
Other than the fact that we were attacked on 9/11.
Yes, okay. We were attacked on 9/11, but it was who was really running the attacks, I think, that leads us to the heart of this. But there were tons of motives beyond that. I mean, it is absolutely ludicrous to believe that 19 men operating from caves in Afghanistan were able to execute that kind of attack with that precision. I suspected, on the day of 9/11, as the attacks were taking place, when the second plane hit the World Trade Center, that would be Flight 11, I automatically knew that there was something wrong. One of the reasons why is because my father, who just passed away a few weeks ago, had flown in Air Force interceptors, and I was very familiar with NORAD. I was raised in the Air Force, and I know the precautions and the standard operating procedures that have been in place since the 1950s, all of which had been circumvented. As soon as that second plane hit, I knew something was wrong. And as we look at the motives for that, really, all the motives up for the attacks of 9/11, oil, oil, and oil. There was massive trading on the financial markets from Tokyo to San Francisco to Chicago to London to Berlin, all before 9/11, exercising put options.
There is one conspiracy theory about 9/11 that's more far-fetched and unbelievable than all the others, and that's the official conspiracy theory told by our government. And yet, the majority of Americans believes it. I can't figure out how they can possibly believe that story.
And in fact, according to USA Today, U.S. agents were inside Al-Qaeda. And it reads, U.S. intelligence overheard Al-Qaeda operatives discussing a major pending terrorist attack in the weeks prior to September 11th and had agents inside the terror group. But the intercepts and field reports didn't specify where or when a strike might occur, according to U.S. officials. The disclosures add to a growing body of evidence to be examined in congressional hearings that opened today, and how the CIA, FBI, and other agencies failed to seize on intel. Now, before I go
Alex, let's go back to 1995. In the Philippines, they busted an Al-Qaeda cell and captured all their documents and got their what was on their computers and stuff, and they uncovered Operation Bojinka. Okay, now Operation Bojinka clearly stated that their plan was to hijack airliners and fly them into prominent structures, and named specifically was the World Trade Center. So anybody with any sense, somewhere at the top of our intelligence pyramid, somebody knew that that was the plan. Now, I understand and I agree that at the lower and secondary, tertiary levels, some of these agents, CIA, FBI, they were getting a feel. They knew something was in the works. They knew something was going to happen. And I think it's true that they probably did not, they weren't in a position to connect all the dots. okay? But people at the highest echelon were. And yet, here we are 4 years after 9/11, and no one has even been reprimanded, much less fired, or even questioned heavily about why didn't you connect the dots and tell us what was going to happen.
No, they were promoted.
Yes.
There's a briefing tomorrow on Capitol Hill, which is co-sponsored by Representative Cynthia McKinney and by Representative Raul Gruilla from Arizona. It's a briefing, not a hearing, where it's out there for the other members of Congress. The 9/11 Commission report 1 year later is the title, A Citizen's Response. Did the Commission get it right? And there will be testimony all day. It also will address the flaws in the Commission process, the omissions and errors in the Commission's final report, including issues around NORAD, FAA, and P-56, the suspects in the plots, and the links to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden.
With 9/11, what is the biggest thing for you that stood out in suspecting the official conspiracy theory of the White House?
Well, I think at a very base level that we don't know the truth of who was operating in the planes that day, that we don't know the actual identities and names of the suspects that were named for us by the FBI incorrectly, because at least 7 of the people whose real identity that is are still living.
Right,
So
as reported by the BBC in late September '01.
Yes, there were reports when people came forward and they said, that's my ID and that's my...
I think if you liked what Adolf Hitler did, you're going to love what George Bush is doing. And we see the preemptive strikes in Afghanistan and in Iraq, like we saw Hitler's preemptive strikes in Czechoslovakia. He had to sell that crap to the people. But first of all, he had to have the Enabling Act, which allowed him to become dictator. There's a statement made by H.L. Mencken. He said, one can never underestimate the intelligence of the American public. And if I took a look at some of the people out there today in the Christian conservative camp who have bought this crap that, Bush is number one, a conservative. First of all, he's so far left, he makes Fidel Castro look like a member of the John Birch Society. That's number one. And number two, being a Christian, you don't become a follower of Christ by laying in the damned coffin, giving a satanic initiation to their Lord Lucifer. I mean, that's what they do. The initiates, the 15 guys surrounded in black Klansman-like robes, look down in the coffin of this nude initiate.
What really, really upsets you about the official story of 9/11? What inspired you to make this film?
It is a story. It is a lie. It's a fabrication. It's not, their story is based on fiction. I would sooner believe that George Bush could walk on water than I would believe the crap and pap that these guys have put out.
I think he thinks he walks on
the
water.
The 19 terrorists, right? 7
alive.
are alive today. 1 was dead before the event. Muhammad Atta's passport could never have survived through the steel, through the concrete, through the toilets, through the inner structure, the core of that building, go out the other side, drop on the ground, have all of the rubble from the South Tower, then go on the ground, and then the North Tower go on the ground, and the FBI looking over and saying, hey, this is his passport. Now we can identify who these guys are. And when George Bush sat there and said, I was watching it on television, and then had to go into the other room, and that's when he found out about the second event by him not saying anything or doing anything.
Amazing.
It indicated that he was not concerned about what had happened.
Right,
nothing was going to happen to him.
And he had no problem endangering the children's lives if, in fact, he was in danger.
And he sat there and waited. They said, it's coming.
Reading his book.
On No, this is before. And it either had to be in the limousine or wherever it was, but he knew it was coming. He says, I was watching it on television.
Yeah.
And he was. You should be concerned when Bush is telling the truth.
What I started to do was connect the dots, there are many things going on in the world, many different, quote, conspiracies, many manipulations, many engineered events, and many engineered forms of control, whether it's control of finance or control of the media, whatever. But when you connect the dots, you realize that all roads lead to a network of interbreeding families that go back to the ancient world, who call themselves the Illuminati.
Now, tell us a little bit
and the whole picture started to unfold, and I've been doing it now for 15 years full time, and you know the picture is really starting to become clear. Not least because the agenda of the Illuminati, which is a global Orwellian state, is of course in front of our eyes more and more with every passing day now.
Right, and as viewers of this program, obviously are the choir for the most part, are now becoming aware that the last election was fake. We talked about that last week. It was staged, and we're starting to see really that we have a false choice, a false left or right, or dealing with Republicrats, if you will, in this country.
Yeah, the thing is that the greatest form of control actually is not an overt dictatorship. Like fascism or communism. That is a very efficient form of control for a while, but it has a major flaw, which is that the people being controlled know they're controlled. And when you know that you are controlled and who the controllers are, then you've got a chance of doing something about it. And eventually the desire for freedom will bring situations like that to an end at some point. It might take some time, but it will happen. The greatest form of control is the illusion that we're free, and that's the kind of control that they've created in what we call the democratic world. It is a few controlling events while giving the impression to the people that they are free. Now, what is this freedom? This freedom is putting a cross on a piece of paper once every 4 or 5 years, or in America, pressing some button on some electronic computer system which anyone can decide how you're going to vote, and we call that freedom. People do not rebel against not being free when they think they are. You know, it's what I call in the books the prison without the bars. You know, you sit in a cell with bars around you. You know you're in a cell, but if you sit in a cell and you can't see the bars, and you think you can get up and go where you like whenever you choose. And what is happening now, Alex, and the reason that so many more people are waking up, and it had to be like this. It was people, weren't going to wake up until more and more this Orwellian centralized fascist state.
Certainly, oil companies are making record profits and will continue to make record profits, and certainly oil producers too will benefit greatly from this oil price hike.
Okay, so from all that information you just gave me in your slide, there are a lot of what I would call spokespeople from the mainstream media and Wall Street saying this is a fantastic time to invest. Just look at Alan Greenspan. He has been playing up and down with interest rates. What is your outlook on the stock market as a whole, its stability, its instability?
Well, oil is a commodity, like so many commodities. And what I predict is there will be very shortly great instability in the commodities market, not just oil. And so we'll see some price declines, perhaps dramatic ones in all commodity sectors. And this, by the way, is very much contrary to the opinion of everyone. And shortly thereafter is probably when we will see a stock market collapse.
The analogy is it's like a football team owner who owns both teams that go to the Super Bowl. Either way, he wins. But he wants to keep it real quiet that he owns both teams. So regardless of who wins, even if you have a real contest going on out on the field, the establishment globalists who are trying to build this one world government, they win. And some would say, yeah, but still it's a real football game. No, they set the rules. They put who they want into the game. They direct and control who is going to win that election. And so the Republicans and the Democrats will fight basically over a bunch of petty issues, but that's just rhetoric. When it gets down to brass tacks, they're unified. Of the 100 biggest economies, the U.S. being the largest, 40 of the 100 largest economies are not countries. They're not states. They are private companies. And they have their own mercenaries. They have their own security teams. They have their own black ops squads that spy on other companies and governments. They have moles in our government. And basically, they've gone from having moles in our government to controlling our government. But they know the public's getting wise to it, so they use their very sophisticated PR firms to again, create the illusion of political freedom.
Basically, I look at the news media, and a lot of material is sent in by the readership as well. And mostly what I'm looking for, the purpose of the site, it's a nonpartisan site. I'm there to expose deceptions and cover-ups and crimes by the government, by corporations that are used to trick the American people out of their money, trick them into wars. And certainly at the present day, there's a lot of work for the site to be doing.
Do you think it's important to emphasize that there's corruption on both sides, both Democrat and Republican?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's funny, the Republicans think I must be a Democrat, the Democrats think I must be a Republican, but my target is anybody who is going to lie to the people and abuse their office of trust and, to line their own pockets. And certainly, of course, the biggest story right now are the deceptions that were used to trick this nation into a war of conquest in Iraq.
Yes, those are big, but the thing about your website that I've noticed and things like Infowars.com is sometimes it goes a little bit beyond that in finding out what really happened. And part of that is 911, and you have a very large 911 archive on your website.
Yes, I do, and to put that in its proper context, you need to look back through history and realize that many tyrannical governments, many dictators, have used faked terror attacks to anger their populations or scare their populations into a course of war that otherwise they would have avoided. Certainly Hitler did this with Poland. He convinced the German people that the Polish were about to invade and that the only way they could save their homes was to invade Poland first. This should sound very, very familiar to those of us who watched George Bush in his run-up to war in Iraq, warning us about those nuclear bombs and those chemical weapons, and they could attack us in 45 minutes. And, of course, in the wake of the invasion, we have discovered that Saddam really was telling the truth. He was not in defiance of the United Nations. He had gotten rid of all those weapons of mass destruction, including the ones he bought from the U.S., and so basically, we were lied into a war. And most wars of aggression have to be started that way because your average human being is a kind, decent, and fair person who's not going to march into the neighbor's country and steal their wealth just because the leaders say so. They have to be tricked into it. And it's as old as Rome itself to pull these kind of deceptions on a population.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy.
It's not that America itself, our place of living, is going to be gone, but the way we think and the way we act, the way we react is going to be changing. And people are going to be realizing more and more that their existence is going to be taken away by this police state. Now, you may think that Alex is overreacting, you may think I'm overreacting, but you need to take a look at what happened with Katrina, what happened with Rita, the way FEMA was set up to fall, the way FEMA now, I mean, Michael Brown is still on the payroll, he's being questioned. It's a nice little dog and pony show, but it looks like FEMA is more powerful now than it's ever been. Federal Emergency Management Agency, their job is not to help people. Their job is to set up a police state or martial law. Their job is to create government when there is no government. And that is why you may feel they failed, but 6% of their budget only goes to helping people. The other goes to police states, martial law, and to getting the military out there to go from door to door to get people out of their homes.
The Taliban did not exist even in our vocabulary prior to 1993 or so. And so when the Mujahideen fought each other, could not agree, the country was in a way on fire and you had 3 or 4 different kind of currencies, the country was essentially dismembered because the Mujahideen could not agree amongst themselves. In the meantime, there was something else that the United States was very eager to do, and that is to access the oil and gas of Central Asia.
Yeah, we're going to get
And the quickest way was through Afghanistan, but to do that, you need a stable, secure environment.
Right.
The United States became convinced that the Mujahideen could not deliver peace and security and so forth. The United States, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan created and invented the Taliban.
Which is our next area of discussion.
Yes.
Osama bin Laden. Now, he was a Saudi born with relatives that were like Salim bin Laden, which were partners with members of the Bush administration, various ones.
Yes,
senior,
including the Carlyle
junior.
Group.
Yes, including the Carlyle Group.
Yes.
Now, he was created for their interests to fight the Russians. We understand that.
He worked for the CIA.
Absolutely.
Full time. Yes.
Now, when
for
I had
years.
said earlier, when we had talked about funding, and you said it cut off, specifically, the CIA has a very close relationship with the ISI,
yes,
the Pakistan
they
intelligence,
work together.
as well as the Mossad and MI5.
Yes.
Now, without making this a 9/11 show, we've done many like that before. This isn't one of those. But we do need to cover the point that they were primarily the reasons why, the Taliban took control of Kabul, because they were still receiving aid from the ISI or people affiliated with the ISI through that channel.
Indeed.
Right. What was the ISI trying to do to Afghanistan?
Well, Pakistan has always meddled in Afghan affairs, partly because Iran has meddled and continue to as we speak. And there are a couple of reasons. One is that Pakistan, because of its differences with India, has always been looking for what is called the strategic depth, so that if Indian forces move into Pakistan, Pakistani forces will have a place to withdraw to, and that was Afghanistan. And that's one reason. The other reason is the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan has never been accepted by any of the Afghan governments for the last 100 years. That border, the Durand Line, so-called Durand Line, which was arbitrarily determined by the British, accepted by the Pakistanis, but the Afghans have never accepted that.
Do you believe, in your opinion, that there are criminal elements within the CIA and or the FBI?
Well, let me answer that. It's a very simple question to answer. It sounds complex, but it isn't. There's 2 elements within our government. There's the covert and the overt. Now, the overt are the fellows with the suit and tie that go out to the bank robbery and interview witnesses and ask how tall was the suspect, what race was he, how did he weigh, and all that sort of thing. The covert operation, which is what we're talking about as far as the terrorism element is concerned, is very actively involved, and they have infiltrated almost every level of our government, including Washington, D.C., congressmen, politicians, and it's a frightening situation because they are in control, and this covert operation is, very frankly, what's behind the whole terrorist movement in this country.
How long has this criminal element been here in the United States with the CIA? I mean, can we go all the way back to the time that Nazis were brought in to organize the CIA, or is that how far back we can go? Or the CIA or the FBI?
We can go back to 1776. In 1773, the Rothschild family commissioned Adam Weishaupt, a former Jesuit priest, to come up with the 25 goals to take over the world. And on May the 1st, 1776, May 1st being a communist holiday, by the way, he announced the 25 goals to take over the world. And these included, I won't go into all of them, of course, we don't have that much time, included control of the media, included elect your own people, meaning the Illuminati people. It's called the Illuminati, by the way, to positions of authority, to corrupt the youth through sex and drugs. If you can't elect your own people, to put your own tours in as advisors, and the list goes on and on and on. It reads like the Communist Manifesto, by the way.
You know, here we are in the information age, and we're probably dumber than we've ever been. That's a bit ironic, I guess we would have to say. But, you know, this is because a good portion of our nightly newscast is eaten up by, you know, feel-good stories and stories about control. And, you know, a good example is the gentleman that was shot on the airplane down there in Miami last week or the week before. You know, here's a pretty good example of what antidepressants do to people. Of course, that was completely left out of the story. And then just the second the story's still hot, you've got people out shilling for more control. You know, if we had more fingerprinting, Alex, if we had more databasing, if we had some iris scanners in the airport, maybe something like this wouldn't happen. So you see why it's important for us to try to clarify, you know, this glut of information. I feel that that's what we do, and I think that that's one of the most important reasons for our existence. We have to let people know what is important and what isn't important, and that's not to say that we're preaching at people and trying to tell people what to think, but, you know, minimally getting things on the record that are so important, life and death important for our families, important for our children, and I'm really proud to be a part of that infrastructure.
Researchers out there, other than yourself, have likened what you're talking about to something called the New World Order or globalization or something like a world government. What's your reaction to that?
Well, we're there. We economic hitmen, since World War II, have managed to create the world's first truly global empire. And we've done it primarily without the military. The military comes in only as a last resort. We've done it primarily through economics. And you might say that the New World Order, globalization, has already occurred. It's a fact of life. And for the first time in the history of the world, there truly is a global empire. We in the United States are its captain and coach, although there are many other countries involved, but we are really the leader in that process.
I heard things that were not true, and I just dismissed them as that I was the new kid on the block and wanted to become a good police officer. And so after 17 weeks, I went onto the streets of Phoenix, and immediately I began to realize that we were not trained to be the servants and protectors of the people as much as we were trained to be the servants and the protectors of the system from the people. And this disturbed me, but I applied myself for the first 3 years, worked in the high crime area of South Phoenix, and became the most highly decorated officer in the history of Phoenix, Arizona, with God's blessing, because I'm not that cool and not that great a guy, but it just happened. And so when I was at the top of my career, most highly decorated officer, I began to be deeply concerned about us violating our oaths as police officers that we took to defend the Constitution, protect the people's rights and property and so forth, and that we were given orders quite often that were unconstitutional, violated people's rights, or immoral, and sometimes unlawful. And so as my career was going so well, I began to speak out and talk to fellow officers about they should read the Constitution and understand their oath, because then they could say no to orders that were unconstitutional and violated their oath, and orders that were immoral and unlawful. And when I did that, my career potential ended, Alex. I became ostracized, and soon after that, I was not only the most highly awarded officer, highly decorated, but I became the most fired officer for speaking out about unconstitutional things we were doing to fellow officers and asking them to say no to immoral and unlawful orders. And so I became pretty unpopular, and that started me along the educational track to try to find out what was really going on in the country. And I started my Aid and Abet Police Military newsletter for police and military on constitutional issues, where we discussed these things. And I found a good audience out there. A lot of police officers and soldiers are as concerned about these immoral and unlawful orders and violations of, for military, the violations of the UCMJ, military justice, the Code of Military Justice, and police officers violating their oaths of office to defend the Constitution.
We need to get informed about what our government is doing and how our elected officials are basically not being held to account for what happened on September 11th. And from getting informed about this, the American people would be able to make informed decisions about who they should or should not elect. and that it is time, once you look at the evidence and you begin to realize that the official story doesn't hold water, and you begin to look at the evidence that points to the possibility of complicity, then the next step is to take action and to channel the anger and frustration that one feels of being betrayed by one's own government into something positive, into some type of a political transformation in the country. That is what I hope will come of this research, that once people question, they will then hold their elected officials to account and vote them out of office if they will not get to the bottom of these events.
Mike, I am absolutely alarmed at the poll that CNN hosted. How many people believe that there's additional information about 9/11 that remains to be talked about? And you're looking at 83% in the last poll, and then the poll on Anderson Cooper 360, which you see on the screen as well, gave their own poll. Again, more than 80% believe, yes, there are additional answers we're looking for. So which poll, Mike, do you think we should be looking at when you talk with the average person down the street, and most of them really don't want to get into 9/11 or what it was about, or don't question the official story?
Well, there was also a Zogby poll commissioned in New York City a couple of years back that showed that overwhelming 66% of New Yorkers doubt the official story. So I think based on those kinds of things, I'm hoping that this becomes a wake-up call for the American people to participate in their own governance.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories.
Now, and since 9/11, there has been what some have called a major boom in conspiracy nuts. What is your perspective on perhaps what happened on 9/11 and this major rush to the internet and to cable access and places like that for information on what's really going on this planet today?
Well, I think we can go even further back with 9/11 because in the 70s, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had been, he's been an advisor to presidents, beginning, I think, with Jimmy Carter, right up to the present one. And he was head of the State Department and Department for War, the military, and all the rest of it. He put a book out in the 70s called, I think it was Between Two Ages. And in Between Two Ages, he talked about, in the Technotronic era, a chapter, that was the name of the chapter, he described a system that would be given to the public of communication, which would be given globally, and the public would adapt to it very quickly, but its real function was to monitor the public and also to create a new world culture through indoctrination by electronic means. He then went on to talk about higher weaponry along the lines of the scalar technology, the Tesla technology, which would be used to alter the behavior of the public without them even knowing. And so he's a very high guy who deals in speciality of warfare, telling you what was going to happen in the near future. And then out comes the internet years later along that very path that he talked about. And we know that for total security and the total information network, these guys mean total. That means everybody. Everybody must be observed, understood, personality profiled, followed down through their life, and that the computer is essential for this part of it.
Well, Alan,
and then when we get into his book written in the late 90s called The Grand Chessboard, he discusses the necessity for the United States to take over from Britain as the world power for the new American century, which he belonged to, this club. And he describes the attack formula beginning with Afghanistan, then Iraq, then Iran, then Syria. And lo and behold, but he said, though, we need something to motivate the American public for war, something on the scale of a Pearl Harbor event.
Right.
And bingo, you get 9/11 happening, and they go right off into Afghanistan, then Iraq.
Well,
the same formula.
And
now, you couldn't have that kind of luck in real life. This was planned, obviously.
And with Brzezinski, because I know what you're saying is true because I've looked at the Grand Chessboard, he would even refer to certain people in different parts of the world as barbarians.
Yeah.
So you hit on a lot of major issues in the book, too many to talk about in an hour. What should we cover in the next few minutes that we should review and remind people to look at certain parts of 9/11?
Okay, one thing that's probably that is new since the last time we talked is my discovery about the role of Philip Zelikow. Of course, I made a big deal of that in my second book, the 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions, and I suggested that the explanation for why this was such a terrible report, in which they omitted all the relevant facts that contradicted the official theory, except for a few where they thought they could refute the argument by distorting the facts. I explained this by pointing out that Zelikow is essentially a member of the Bush administration. So you really had the Bush administration examining itself. He had co-authored a book with Condoleezza Rice during the Clinton years. Before that, he had served on the National Security Council with her in the first Bush administration. Then when Bush II came to office, she brought him on to help with the transition to the new Security Council. And then he was appointed to the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. All of that is widely known now, at least within the 9/11 truth community. But the new thing I discovered is he is the one who was brought on by Rice to write the document called National Security Council 2002. This is significant because it was in that document that the new doctrine that the Bush administration had wanted and the neocons, the neoconservatives had been calling for, which was the right simply to attack any country we wanted to, even though there was no imminent threat. According to international law, the only time you can engage in a preemptive attack is if you have very solid intelligence that another country is about to launch an attack on you, and that attack is so imminent there isn't time to take it to the Security Council. Well, this administration despises the United Nations and its Security Council, doesn't believe it should be hampered by international law, so it had been wanting to break free from that doctrine.
Wake up, the American dream is turning into the American nightmare. The Bill of Rights are in danger. This is becoming a dictatorship. Analysts that are coming forward not only about the war, but about the lie, the official story of 9/11. Make no doubt about it. 9/11 was a catalyst event to scare you all into submission. We're standing up for our country. It's being dismantled. I think you've seen a police state. You haven't seen anything yet. You're going to see more cameras tracking, tracing, everything. Any of this racist, fascist state that everyone should stand up against. Reality is a shared hallucination. Do you want to say something? 9/11 was a what?
9/11 was an inside job.
Yep. 9/11 was an inside job. The self-inflicted wounds of political tool used to enslave you and break you down, make you feel like a small child again. Time my mom and dad told me you did something wrong. We didn't do anything wrong. We didn't do anything wrong.
Nowhere else on earth does that mark of the beast flow in and out on a great tidal wave of paper, letters.
I read one of your columns recently. A lot of them are posted on feedair.com and other places on the web about some of the criticisms you have of the official story of 9/11 pertaining to the demolitions of the buildings, the way that they collapsed. What were those concerns that you actually have?
Well, the explanation given in the 9/11 Commission report is obviously false, because the buildings are known to have collapsed in free fall time. Free fall time is a measure of the time that elapses from dropping an object from the top of a building's elevation to the ground, and it falls without any resistance other than air. So if you took a baseball, for example, or a fishing weight and you dropped it off the top of the World Trade Center tower, the time it takes to hit the ground is called free fall time. And that time, of course, is time that elapses when the object meets no resistance other than air. So we know that the buildings came down in free fall time. That's not disputed. No one disputes that. Now, the problem with the explanation is that the government says the buildings fell as a result of pancaking. Now, pancaking, the way that works is a floor above, the debris from a floor above, falls onto the floor below and has to overcome the resistance of the intact floor before it can fall any further. And therefore, it cannot fall at free fall time because when you meet resistance on the way down, it delays the collapse. And so the time it takes to pancake is much greater than the time it takes for free fall. You can also think about it this way. You've got the same object, and you've got the same height of, say, a tube of air and a tube of water. And you drop identical objects into the two tubes at the same time, and which one do you think will reach the bottom first?
I understand.
The one in the air, because the water will offer more resistance to the object than the air. So what we know is that it's impossible for the 9/11 Commission to acknowledge the free fall collapse of the buildings and then to tell us at the same time that the buildings pancaked. The only way known to science that a building can fall in free fall time is through engineered demolition. And the way engineered demolition works is that at split-second intervals, the supports of the floors below are taken out before the debris from the top reaches them. So it meets no resistance.
Man, you hear this bullshit they be talking every day, man. It's like these motherfuckers is just like professional liars, you know what I'm saying? It's wild. Listen, Bin Laden didn't blow up the projects. It was you, nigga. Tell the truth, nigga. Bush knocked down the tower. Tell the truth, nigga. Bush knocked down the tower. Tell the truth, nigga. Bin Laden didn't blow up the projects. It was you, nigga. Tell the truth, nigga. Bush knocked down the tower. Tell the truth, nigga. Bush knocked down the tower.
I pledge no allegiance, nigga. Fuck the president's speeches. I'm baptized by America and covered in leeches. The dirty water that bleaches your soul and your facial features, drowning you in propaganda that they spit through the speakers. And if you speak about the evil that the government does, the Patriot Act to track you to the type of your blood. They try to frame you and say you was trying to sell drugs and throw a federal indictment on niggas to show you love. This shit is run by fake Christians, fake politicians. Look at their mansions and look at the conditions you live in. All they talk about is terrorism.